terms of definitions, for the Fulfilling Lives programme, a navigator is a service-neutral staff member who works with people affected by multiple disadvantage and supports them to secure and coordinate a range of support and services as needed. Most Fulfilling Lives partnerships have used the navigator model in their work with beneficiaries. So the aim of this bit of research that we've undertaken is to help organisations to understand the role of the navigator in supporting people with multiple disadvantage, and to also illustrate how Fulfilling Lives partnerships have supported the development of the role. Beth, I can't seem to move the slides on.
You should be able to. Can you now?
No, my slides have gone again. Awfully sorry.
Would you slide for you?
Yeah.
Once.
As long as you can hear me okay. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide, the second slide, please.
Of course.
Thank you.
We've got it up, the key research questions.
Thanks, Beth. I'll give you a signpost when it's ready to move on to the next one, and apologies everybody for our technical issues. So the key questions we sought to answer with this research were as follows. Firstly, what are the key characteristics of the multiple disadvantage navigator role that differentiate it from other support worker roles or navigators working in a single sector or a service? Secondly, what skills, knowledge, attitudes and behaviours does an effective multiple disadvantage navigator need? And finally, what support needs to be in place for multiple disadvantage navigators to be effective in their role? So I'll go through now and I'll summarise the key findings related to each of these research questions. Beth, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So firstly, what are the key characteristics of the multiple disadvantage navigator role? So generally speaking, we found that the role of a navigator differs from a traditional support worker role in a number of different ways. Typically, navigators work with people over an extended period to develop trusting relationships, and this can be over several years. As a result, navigators are better able to understand beneficiaries' needs and also the challenges that they face. They also provide an important source of stability in their lives. Navigators also act as a single point of contact for beneficiaries and support services, and this really helps to overcome the challenges that can arise because people are interacting with a range of different services and have multiple support workers. They also navigate systems on behalf of beneficiaries and are what we call a service neutral. So a service neutral navigator is better able to work across different sectors to secure the necessary services. And by developing an understanding of an individual's needs and circumstances, navigators can help to connect beneficiaries with appropriate services. Navigators also support beneficiaries to achieve their own goals. So whilst a navigator has a role in encouraging beneficiaries to make positive lifestyle choices, they do not insist that beneficiaries address these issues before they can get support. So by taking a person-centred approach rather than a service-led one, focusing on external targets, the beneficiary feels more involved in decisions and is more likely to actively engage with services as a result. Navigators are also tenacious and persistent, achieving the best outcomes for beneficiaries, and there is a need to keep motivation high and build hope when others may give up. As such, the navigator does not give up on beneficiaries, so they'll continue to work with a beneficiary even when they display problematic behaviours, and this will not hinder access to support. We also found that a small caseload is important to ensure that the navigator can provide a personalised and holistic service. Caseloads of between 6 and 10 kind of ensure that navigators can offer this personalised service. Beth, if you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in regards to the findings related to the skills, knowledge, attitudes and behaviours required to be an effective multiple disadvantage navigator, Fulfilling Lives partnerships have developed a range of resources to help recruit and support effective navigators, and these include competency frameworks, workforce development plans and also evaluations of navigator support. Across these resources, we repeatedly identified a number of key skills and competencies required by navigators, and many of these are really echoed in the wider literature on navigator roles. So firstly, navigators require excellent interpersonal and communication skills, including the ability to show empathy. These skills are essential for effective navigators. They need to be able to build relationships not just with beneficiaries, but also with professionals too, to enable access to the right services and support. Advocacy skills are also required in order to ensure that the beneficiary's voice is heard, and navigating a complex and often fragmented system requires resilience and a positive attitude to support beneficiaries through the challenges and setbacks. In supporting individual needs, navigators also need to be flexible and spontaneous and resourceful, and may find themselves doing things that other support workers would perhaps consider to be unorthodox. Navigators require knowledge of local services, referral pathways and legal entitlements, as well as having a network of contacts to help secure those vital services and support that beneficiaries need. However, not all navigators will have detailed knowledge of all aspects of the system, so the ability to collaborate and share learning with colleagues is also important. Knowledge of trauma-informed approaches is also important for navigators, as there is a strong association between trauma and multiple disadvantage. Let's on to the next slide, please. Thank you. As Chris highlighted, lived experience is particularly valuable in helping navigators to develop relationships with beneficiaries through shared experience and understanding. So we found that navigators with lived experience had kind of acted as role models for beneficiaries, showing that recovery from addiction and mental ill health is possible. However, navigators without lived experience also emphasise the particular skills that they have to offer. So other sources of evidence emphasise that the importance of staff having extensive experience of supporting people facing multiple disadvantage. Work experience in particular sectors, such as healthcare or the criminal justice system, can mean that the navigators understand better how these parts of the system work, have a network of professional contacts and are able to use the appropriate terminology. So overall, it's valuable for navigator teams to include a diverse range of experience, skills and knowledge, including lived experience. And ensuring recruitment panels, ensuring that recruitment panels include people with lived experience is also important in ensuring that staff who are hired are able to connect with beneficiaries. On to the last slide, please, Beth. Thank you. So finally, what support do navigators need? The navigator role is intensive and demanding. They need a supportive environment in order to protect their well-being and also to avoid burnout. So this includes providing a clear job specification, creating a culture of self-care, and also ensuring that there are opportunities for sharing experiences with colleagues. Comprehensive training and development programs are also needed to help ensure that navigators feel supported. And regular reflective practice also helps to build resilience, allows staff time to work through challenges and avoid depersonalising beneficiaries. However, navigators are not the magic bullet and do not work in a vacuum, so merely employing navigators will not resolve all the challenges of often a fragmented system of support. But in order to be successful, navigators need the support of a system where individual services collaborate and are effectively coordinated. Navigators also have a role to play in highlighting where systems change is also needed. So these are just the key top-line findings emerging from the second of our thematic studies, and presentations from Kieran and Ray will help to provide a more in-depth view of the role of multiple disadvantage navigators and also the use of reflective practice for multiple disadvantage navigators. Thank you for listening, and apologies again for the technical difficulties.
No worries. Thank you ever so much, Jatinder, for such a good overview of the work around the navigators. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to request that Jatinder or members of the CFE team, if possible, respond to comments via the chat box, and then it just means we can move on to the next presentation and we're not eating into time. Yes. So, Kieran, I'm going to hand over to you next. We don't have, or Kieran's not going to use slides, so what I'm going to do is turn the slides off for now. And Kieran, if you want to turn on your video. I mean, you should be on the screen. Can I ask anyone else at this moment to keep their cameras off? Kieran, have we got you?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Beth?
Yes, I can. Welcome. Over to you, Kieran.
Thank you, Beth. Right, so I was asked to obviously speak on the a typical day as a navigator, and what I found since I started working at Blackpool Fulfilling Lives is that doesn't exist. So, you know, we start the day in a flash meeting with all the navigators, the management meeting, and talk, going through our diaries for the day, going back over any issues that may have arisen from the shift the night before, the shift the day before, such as like safeguarding or any incidents that may occur. And once we talk through that, then we kind of juggle our diaries and prioritise as to what needed to be dealt with. So, you know, I liked everything that I've heard so far because it's when I started working at Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, I mean, I'll kind of qualify myself first. So I have 20 years lived experience before I started working. So I went to a treatment centre in St Anne's near Blackpool. Ended up working there as a lot of people do. Moved on to the area to the kind of homeless sector. Worked in homeless hostels. Started working as a floating support worker. Ended up going down the road of prison in reach and supported housing. And in 2014, I decided I didn't have enough lived experience, so I went out and done a little bit more research. And so I was kind of in the wilderness for about 3 years. And when I came back in 2017, I quickly got my head down and started working on my own recovery. Now, I applied for the job at Blackpool Fulfilling Lives because I liked what I heard. I liked how they worked. I liked how they were questioning services and how services were working. My experience of working with services before were you kind of put up and shut up. And, you know, did as you were told. You had policies and procedures. Speaking to people that I knew in recovery that were working for Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, and, you know, you were actually given the freedom to go out and question how other services were working, and that really, really appealed to me because I'm not backward and coming forward when I feel like I need to say something. And by working with Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, it kind of gave me that encouragement to go out and question how services were dealing with certain individuals. And I love what people have said, and I don't know who it was that said, I think it was Wilson, no two clients are the same. You know, they may present with the same kind of issues such as, you know, homelessness, mental health, issues with the criminal justice system. No two clients are the same, and it's kind of dealing with them as individuals rather than a cohort. That really, really appealed to me. But the problem was, services, for me, in my experience, always dealt with them as cohort. At Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, we were encouraged to challenge that, and I think a typical, I mean, I can give you a little bit of a case study. You know, a typical example of that is actually my very, very first client, and I noticed one of my colleagues was logged in here, and she was very, very instrumental in actually helping me to kind of voice how I felt that things should be looked at. So I turned up at the client's house. He was allocated to me. Obviously, I'd gone through the procedure of being inducted and, you know, into my role. And I turned up at the client's house just to be introduced. There's police everywhere. The client is on a walker. He can't walk properly. He's been homeless for years. He's got intrinsically he's been involved with substance misuse and alcoholism, but he's been cooked in his flat. So there's drug dealers coming to his flat, and there's trouble there, there's fights. That morning there was actually a stabbing at the address, so we turned up and there was police everywhere. And it hit me in the face. So obviously we've taken him aside and found out what was going on. We spoke to the police, the neighbourhood police team were there. That client was looked at as a nuisance. He was looked at as an absolute nuisance, and straight away, myself and my colleague thought, no, we need to change people's perceptions of this client as part of that cohort. Now, during the course of that day, we had to actually, you know, sit down and speak. There was a PCSO there, thank God, that was actually kind of took a sympathetic view to the situation that he was in because he was being bullied, his benefits were being taken off him. So we managed to start talking to the PCSO, who managed to get speaking to the neighbourhood police team, who managed to get us speaking to the police. And it turned out that obviously that this lad had a lot of issues, and he was very, very vulnerable. Take away the fact that he was involved in substance misuse, and there was chaos around the property that they lived. By the end of that day, so my role there, it was my colleague who kind of helped me maneuver. Irene, she's here. My role was to kind of coordinate the other services. So my role is kind of a step away from the client. Obviously, I'm there letting them know that I support them, but it's coordinating the other services for the most, for the best outcome. By the end of that day, the client has had his property closed down, and he's in supported housing, he's in emergency accommodation. So now they're starting to have a different kind of look at the client, and okay, substance misuse, we need to get him on a prescription. He's talking with it, he wants to get clean. And the police need to come and speak to him about what was going on inside the flat. He needed to feel safe to speak to the police about drug dealing that was going on there. So we got through that process, and it clicked to me then that my role was to actually go. It wasn't so much working with the client on a daily basis. It was changing how other services worked towards our client and changing their perception of working with a cohort. And I loved it because I was never backward in coming forward in the first place, because I usually kind of said what I'd said in the past and got myself into trouble. Working with Blackpool fulfilling lives, it was encouraged. It was encouraged to challenge how services were working, and that was kind of a daily basis for me, was building relationships with housing options, with Horizons, who are the drug service, and going on outreach with housing options, kind of having a multi-agency kind of, team effort on working with clients as individuals and looking at their issues as individuals, rather than, just like people that are homeless in the street, they're causing problems. In turn, this, we going back to the team that we worked with, we had a team that it was multi kind of skilled, in the sense that we had social workers in the team. We had a PCSO in the team. We had a police officer in the team. And that was invaluable. In the past, I could have been guilty of kind of bringing my lived experience into it and thinking that was the only way. I soon realised, working with Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, that it wasn't the only way. My best working relationship working with Blackpool Fulfilling Lives was working together with a social worker who was on my team. And we worked really, really well together. I was kind of like, I was the mouthpiece, and she was the one that kind of talked, kind of ran me in and kind of said, you need to, don't say that, say this, if you know what I mean, kind of put it this way. And I can honestly say that since I've worked at Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, I'm talking about Fulfilling Lives as an organisation, but Blackpool Fulfilling Lives, every day that I went into work, it didn't feel like I was going in to do a job. Yes, I've come home drained. I've come home absolutely knackered at the end of the evening. But I felt like things were getting done. I felt like things were changing. It's a pity that obviously the funding runs out in March, and as a service we're going to no longer exist, and it is a pity. However, I feel that by us doing what we're doing and being kind of encouraged by the management team and to go out and kind of like make ourselves very, very visible to other services, we have implemented that change. I'd have a client that ring me up in the morning and say, my benefits haven't been paid, I've been sanctioned. I was very sceptical of universal credit when it came out first, and I can honestly say I've done a complete U-turn around universal credit, in the sense that we have built up a relationship with them where all we had to do was make a phone call to the manager, and it got looked at. Do you know what I mean? It got dealt with. They've changed how they deal with the clients. When they come in, they take them to a room and they take them aside, and they're not dealing with them. Security guards not wearing uniforms anymore. Security guards wearing plain clothes. So universal credit for me was a big, big thing regarding the clients, and a lot of our clients are obviously they've been involved in whatever it is, they're intrinsic with drug use, like I said, for years and years and years. And one of the biggest issues was trust. Now, going back to my own lived experience, a lot of clients knew that I had lived experience, and it kind of, to answer a question that somebody's mentioned a while ago about going to support groups and seeing clients in support groups. I absolutely love the fact that we were encouraged to give that to clients as an option. We were encouraged to go to meetings with them. we didn't feel like that in services in the past. I'd have to go outside the town for maintenance, so my recovery suffered. My recovery suffered because I'd have to travel 30 miles to go to a meeting because I couldn't attend in my own town. That's not what it was like in Blackpool Fulfilling Lives. I could take clients to a meeting. I didn't have to tell them I had lived experience because recovery is very, very visible in Blackpool. Like I said, there's no typical day. There's absolutely no typical day because you could go in and have your diary, and it could pan out that it just works to your diary and you keep your appointments. But more often than not, it was kind of not so much kind of juggling with the client and the client's issues that he presented. Like I said, it was juggling with services and them kind of changing the way of thinking. And I'll give you another example of like the first client that sorry, my mouth's dry, I'm going to take a drink. My most recent client that we worked well with another service was we had a lad that was kind of living about, we'd say 4 miles outside. He wasn't living, he was homeless 4 miles outside town. He had a dog and he struggled to get accommodation because he had a dog and he wouldn't leave the dog up. From when I started the role to now, it's changed so much in the sense that I was able to go to the statutory service and say, look, can we it was actually one of the team leaders that spoke to the other service about, let's try something else. Let's go out and see if we can assess them outside McDonald's because that's where we had our appointments. And they did that. So this client started to look at us a bit differently, started keeping his appointments and stuff like that. And it worked to the extent where he now resettled back home in Coventry, where he's like, this was last year. I keep in contact with him every few months. He's still clean, he's working, and it's so for someone that's gone 7 years of living on the street, his life has changed. Now that is rare. It's very, very rare to have kind of that outcome. Our goals were very, very small goals, like getting the client to a doctor's appointment, getting them to probation, getting them to the benefits agency because they're going to be sanctioned. They were our goals. As long as I've been there, I have 2 clients. The first client that I ever had, who's now, I've been in the role over 2 years. He's still clean. He actually works in services, and we were talking about kind of like lived experience. I was able to, and I don't do it with all my clients, but I was able to kind of like, talk to him about my own lived experience and kind of show him that anything was possible. Like I said, I don't do it with all my clients. I don't have to. I think my clients know. And I think I've got off track a little bit and I'm talking about like the lived experience, but this is my daily job. My daily job is to show the clients that anything can be possible, but let's start with small kind of, small goals. Let's get you to that doctor's appointment. Let's get you to Horizon. Let me come to the first appointment with you, so you know that I'm with you, and I'm not here to kind of take on the role of any services that you may have had a problem with in the past. So, my job is to make myself redundant, and that's what I hope to do. Do you know what I mean? And I can honestly say, working with Blackpool Fulfilling Lives actually got into that complete refreshing kind of like new way of working. Fit me like a glove. Like I said, I like to tell people what I'm thinking. In the past it was frowned upon. Here it wasn't, and we've got results from it. That's about it really, but I don't think I can go into any more. But yeah, that's it.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Kieran. And yeah, sorry, I think we tasked you with a hard job to say what's an average day in the life of a navigator. But some of the case studies you drew on there were perfect. So thank you. And I think some of the key kind of themes about just working with such flexibility and being able to really kind of advocate for the beneficiaries. And what else? Winston asked a question earlier around kind of the skills and knowledge base of navigators, and I think you touched on that really well, to say you're kind of working with seconded staff and everyone kind of brings something different to the team. And you have a huge fan base in the audience, because the chat box has been going crazy. I haven't been able to keep up looking at it all, but yeah, brilliant presentation and some really great comments. So please do take your time to look through those, Kieran. We've probably got like 1 minute for 2 minutes for questions now, if anyone has anything particular to ask here, and then now is your chance. We'll just keep the good comments coming in. Whilst we see if anyone unmutes themselves to ask anything, I'm going to start to introduce Ray as well. So Ray will be our final presenter for this morning's session. And kind of now we're putting together the full picture of seeing a bit more about the navigator. So Ray's actually going to be talking about how those navigators can be supported throughout his kind of, and yeah, I've lost my words, sorry. But Ray, I'm going to hand over to you. Kieran, if you can turn your camera off when you get a moment, and then Ray should appear on the screen. So last but not least, over to you this morning, Ray. Welcome.
Thank you. That's great. Can you hear me okay? Yep. So I'm Ray Middleton. I'm the Workforce Development Lead at Fulfilling Lives. I've been there since the beginning, so that's about 7 years now. I was regularly running group reflective practice for our navigators up until March, when as a part of the process of ending, our navigators ended then. But since then, I've been running group reflective practice with other services when the pandemic hit, for a domestic violence service, a frontline homeless service. And as it happens, I've run reflective practice groups for about 20 years. So I've got a good amount of experience of this. And what I'm hoping to do in a brief amount of time is talk about, draw on some of that experience about why do we need reflective practice, because I think reflective practice is an essential ingredient if you're going to develop the workforce to work with people with multiple disadvantage or complex needs. So it's really important. So it helps actually not to assume everybody knows what reflective practice is, so I'm going to try to say what it is in 60 seconds to move on and kind of cover some other questions like where do you do it, who do you do it with, and more importantly, why. So I want to go into a bit of depth about it. So rather than spending 15 minutes talking about different models of reflective practice, I do have a short 15-minute video, so if people want to email me, I can send that to people outside of this group, just explaining different models of reflective practice. But essentially, reflective practice, you describe my practice in the work, and you say how I feel about it. I might feel anxious. When I've worked directly with people and got alongside them, I had a caseload, the housing support worker or other jobs, I've been a care coordinator, I've often felt confused and overwhelmed, for example, is my normal feelings. So you need a safe space to be able to say that and name that, or however you feel. You might be feeling lots of other thoughts and having other thoughts. But if you don't have a safe space to name those feelings, it's going to cause problems in the work. You're going to get problems with your boundaries. So it helps to, in a reflective practice space, to say how you think and feel about the practice and what I did, and own that, take some responsibility for this is my work. Obviously, that means being a little bit vulnerable if you're reflecting with other people. You could do it on a one-to-one. You can reflect on your own in a journal, but I think that's very limited value. It has got value, but there's lots of things I can't learn. If I'm bald, I can't see. I need someone else to say, I'm great, you're going bald. So if I'm reflecting in a journal, I'm not going to say, oh, I realized today I'm going bald. I've had this insight. Because I need other people to say, Ray, do you know you're going bald? Yeah. It's an illustrative example why reflecting with others has lots of benefits. Because I can think, well, I'm not the only person feeling anxious or feeling annoyed or feeling a bit confused about why am I, being pushed and pulled towards the client in this way. So you can reflect on a one-to-one, or you can reflect in a group, which is what I've got a lot of experience of facilitating group reflective practice. So once you've shared your thoughts and feelings about some practice, obviously, if you share something where you're a bit uncertain, you're going to learn more. But that means building up some trust, because the main reason there's resistance to staff engaging in reflective practice is the fear of being judged by my colleagues or by my line manager, and admitting that I'm not sure whether I made a mistake here, or so I might want a reference from my line manager for my next job. So people prefer to be, guarded and say, oh, I'm doing a great job, busy, and burn out, than to have a safe space. So it takes a bit of time and effort to build up some trust, to say it's okay to share. We're not putting double glazing in here. We're working with people with complex needs, and we're going to have some thoughts and feelings about the work. There's a lot of emotional wear and tear. It takes time to build up a bit of trust, so I don't feel I'm just being vulnerable to being judged by my colleagues, because you want it to be a supportive environment to develop our knowledge and skills about the work and the effect it has on us and reduce burnout. So once you've shared how you think and feel about some bit of practice that you did, you want to say what was good about it and be validating, what could have been better about it. You want to allow some degree of doubt about that I could get better and not pretend to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I've got issues because I'm a human being. Don't know about anybody else here. But usually we've got some issues. And so you need some degree of doubt to be able to say, well, I could have done better at this, and then hear what other people think. And then the final bit, if you think about a circle of reflective practice, you've explored what could be better. You've heard other people's views and thoughts about it. You said what was good about it and invalidating. You can say what could have been better about it. Then you say, what would you take away? What would I do differently as a result of this? And that's roughly a circle of reflective practice. And you want to bring in some theory about good practice. So that isn't really complicated. So we just heard Kieran there saying to motivate someone, he wanted some small goals. So that's some theory from motivational interviewing about breaking a big thing into smaller chunks can help to build people's motivation. So in that reflective learning space, we want to be able to bring in some theory about good practice. And the people in the group can have all sorts of ideas about what good practice is in different ways, about sharing power, about co-production, about motivation, about being validating, or anything that's a good idea. So we're reflecting in the light of some good theory about good practice. And it's not, we might have different opinions about what we think is good practice, but you can bring it into open up a dialogue and reflection, discussion to learn from each other, have a bit of humility about it. We want to learn from each other. Somebody just needs to, Ruth, I think, just needs to mute. That's the different models you can use, but that is what is reflective practice. Because often people say, oh, we do reflective practice. But actually, you need to think, are we doing all of those bits? Because sometimes when people say they are doing reflective practice, they're just venting. They're having a cup of tea and saying, oh, I hate management or something, or I'm really having difficulties with my client. But they're just venting. That isn't going through a circle of saying, well, what am I responsible for? What's affecting me about the work? What's affecting me about the context I live in? How could I get better? What was good about it? You see how it's a developmental model. It's not just venting about things I'm not happy about. That isn't reflective practice. It might do you some good to get a bit of self-esteem, but it's not reflective practice in terms of helping us to grow and develop our skills and our knowledge and our awareness of the thing. The other thing that isn't reflective practice is just talking about other people's practice. Oh, Mary's doing this. The other colleague, whoever. That's just gossip, isn't it? That's not reflective practice. That's just saying what other people are doing. So reflective practice is saying about my work, how I feel about it, taking some responsibility for ourselves, and having a safe place to reflect about it. So the next question then is about, how do you do it? So you need someone to facilitate reflective practice, I'd say. That's really important. And so often when I started 20 years ago, I was facilitating a massive group of 25 people, and nobody trained me how to do it. So that's something that I can do, which is help people to see what are the skills about facilitating reflective practice, particularly in a group. Because often people are just dropped in it, like say, oh, could you do this? But people, it's a set of skills you can learn, because you're trying to get people to ask some good questions, for example. You want to create a safe space, you want to see that it's confidential, and you want to go on a journey where people increase the amount of trust. So you are a bit of an emotional container for people to be able to say, well, actually, I feel a bit uncertain about the work. I think this could get better. And you get a culture of reflection going. So that's kind of how you do it. And you could do it, if it's a one-to-one, I could facilitate you reflecting, and then you could ask me questions, and you could facilitate me reflecting. You see, it's not, but you kind of need someone to help you be a mirror to reflect. So you can also think about where to do reflective practice. So on one level, you could think about a formal kind of situation where every month for 90 minutes or an hour, you do reflective practice, and people might bring and talk about a case study, someone they're working with and how they feel about it. Two people could come, do half an hour each, and then that's one way to do it. Sometimes that's called a formulation. You don't need to call that in from the world of psychology and theory, but you don't need to call that. Just talking about the working with one particular person. Or I find very helpful is a theme. So you can talk about engagement skills or motivation. How do we avoid burnout and get motivated? Talk about sharing power. Co-production could be a theme. How do I maintain my role and boundaries? That's a very common challenge. So themes are good to reflect on because they're less revealing. So people feel a bit more like I don't need to be too vulnerable here. I can talk about what I know. It can be quite validating to talk about a theme rather than it's rare to jump in and have a lot of trust where you can say, well, I'm really struggling with this person. But you want to get there eventually with be the hope. But I think really important is to not just think about those formal reflective practice days, because you might not have the resources to do that. You can introduce those principles of reflective practice into, say, if you're doing a PI self-assessment, like a pizzazz, that's a really good approach, which got mentioned already, psychologically informed environments. You can find out loads of information at Robin's website, pilink.net, about PI. But when you ask the team, what do you think in these 5 areas about PI, you're getting them to reflect. So you're introducing the principles of reflective practice into a service self-assessment. But also in training, the training we deliver now is very much in the style of reflective practice. So we'll teach people a little bit about, say, trauma-informed care idea, but then have time to reflect and say, well, how does this relate to you and your work? Is it relevant or not? What do you think? How would you apply this? And so you can do reflective practice through training, which I think is a really helpful way to get people engaged and excited about training. Supervision, you can do reflective practice there. So that's a bit about the where you can do it. You can do it formally and informally. If you create a culture over a cup of tea, you might end up doing that. But also, who with is another question, the who of reflective practice. So you might think the obvious answer is staff, and yes, we want to do this with frontline staff, whether you're volunteers or paid workers. But really, people with multiple and complex needs or multiple disadvantage, part of the difficulty is because they've got a lot of past trauma is they're not reflecting, they're acting out their distress. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But so what we want to do is role model reflecting with the staff team so that when they're having those one-to-one chats with people they're getting alongside to support, that they're reflective. They bring some of that curiosity. Pressing the pause button is a good metaphor I like about reflective practice. We'll press the pause button and get people to think, I wonder why I did that. We had plans, it hasn't gotten well. I'm wondering about that. And she's getting the other person to get curious about themselves or become what they might call, curious, psychologically minded, but you don't need to call it that. It's kind of thinking about my thoughts and feelings and my behavior and what am I doing and why am I caught in these trapped patterns. So we're doing reflective practice with staff in the hope that they take that out to the one-to-one groups as well. And then the reason for me kind of going through this fairly succinctly is I think it is helpful to kind of ask the why bother, because services are usually commissioned without reflective practice because it's difficult or it's awkward or people aren't sure what it is, and so it's easier to commission things to say, do X, Y, and Z to A, B, and C cohorts of people, etc. But it's essential is reflective practice, and I wanted to go a little bit further down the rabbit hole, if I was the white rabbit and you were Alice, as it were, to use a metaphor, about kind of going a bit deeper about reflective practice and saying, why bother? So briefly, this is the why bother, which might seem obvious to some people, but I'll attempt to explain it. People with multiple disadvantage or complex needs, or whatever phrase we want to use. The ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences studies, and other studies have shown us that complex trauma, people have high levels of past trauma who have complex needs. And they also have high levels of neglect, which sometimes gets neglected as a topic, and they have lots of current adversity, so trauma, neglect, and adversity. And so this, what's called unresolved trauma, means the people that we're trying to get alongside and help have lots of built-up emotion of anger, fear, guilt, shame, really strong emotions. And what they tend to do, to use a phrase from trauma-informed care, they tend to act that out. So they feel very uncomfortable. They're not necessarily being able to name that's fear and that's anger and that's guilt and that's shame. But what they're doing, they're feeling really uncomfortable and they act it out by maybe alcohol and drug use to excess, inappropriate sexual activity, maybe there's dangerous situations that they get themselves into, or gambling, or this typical kind of activity, acting out to change how I feel, which is common. And the reason for kind of spelling that out is that we then ask staff to get alongside people, and the people they're getting alongside are being triggered constantly into this fight or flight or flop situation where they're being in a vicious re-traumatizing circle. As we ask staff to get alongside them, and they're going to pick up some of those feelings and emotions in lots of different ways. They pick up those feelings, and this is why bother with reflective practice, remember, because the staff then tend to act out. So without reflective practice, what happens is a different kind of mirroring goes on. The staff start to act out in reaction to these strong emotions, either consciously or unconsciously. And so services tend to mirror and mimic the chaos and confusion of the people that they're working with. And that's typical in this sector. Let's be honest about it. There's a lot of chaos and confusion amongst staff and services. And part of, I'm not saying it's a magic wand, but part of the ingredients of really good practice and getting better is this culture of reflective practice. So you can reflect on what you're doing in a safe space rather than just acting it out. And so on a conscious level, when I work with people, you can be anxious about the risks, and then you're aware at the back of your head about the bureaucracy of the organisation, and I need to do a risk assessment, etc. Be anxious, but you're also wanting to engage with the person. So there's this tension inside yourself consciously about trying to do the work, but unconsciously, I think I'll probably end on this point about trying to. I'm just going a little bit deeper about reflective practice and answering the question of why bother, as well as the what is it, how do you do it, who do you do it, where do you do it, why bother. Unconsciously, a lot of difficulties occur about this push and the pull of staff working with people with unresolved complex trauma, and staff themselves have unresolved trauma often, which is maybe not mentioned. It's a bit of an elephant in the room. And so people get triggered and their own issues can get their own buttons pushed, so they're sucked in to want to save this person because they have similar problems to me, maybe the problems I had. I mean, I'm someone who had, alcohol and drug problems and that, and then got well in the 1990s. And mental health problems and lots of trauma. So I'm someone who's had that experience, then got interested in working in this sector for the last sort of 20 years. But so I know that you can get your buttons pushed for whatever experiences you've had in life, especially if you feel that compassion, or else you might be repelled. You might be asked to work with someone who's a perpetrator of something that happened to you. So you might not want to see them, get pushed away, or you might get pulled in and drawn. That push and the pull. It's unconscious and an emotional thing, a desire thing. Not just a conscious, this is what's going on in my head knowledge. And so it's worth me just briefly mentioning, the fear of mentioning something that's from the world of kind of therapy, but it's helpful, is counter-transference. Because I think you can demystify these ideas. It's not really complicated. So what happens with transference is someone comes along to me and they transfer or redirect some of the patterns of relating to people in their past to me as a housing support worker, for example, or whatever role we're in, probation or. And so say if someone was quite quiet and silent and didn't initiate conversations in their past to stay safe because they didn't want to be humiliated or put down, then I start working with them and they're very quiet, they don't initiate conversations. So I then get drawn in unconsciously to initiating the conversation and talking a lot and taking a lot of the conversation. So I end up having this counter-transference. They've transferred their pattern to me, then I get transferred to them. Or to give another example, just to demystify it, basically, if someone's very oppositional, typical, and wants to argue about everything, and I might then unconsciously, if I've had children, like I've had children and I'm a granddad now, I might then start to think, I start to be a bit more controlling because they're a bit more like oppositional, and without realizing it, I end up trying to control the situation. Or the opposite, I could go, anything goes, it doesn't matter because I'm. So all I'm saying there is unconsciously the patterns that people bring to the past and our own patterns. And reflective practice can be a space. It's not that it'll happen straight away, but it can be a space where we can start to kind of notice some of the conscious and unconscious things that are going on for us doing the work because we're not putting double glazing in. If we're putting double glazing in, it'd be a lot easier. But we're working with people with lots of unresolved trauma and emotion, and we're human beings, unless some of us are androids, and it's in the future now. And, technology, 10 years' time, it might be all androids being sent off to work with people. But at the moment, most of us are human beings, we think, are 80%. We have the test come back. I'm about 87% human, I think. We can, we've got emotions, is what I'm saying. We're not androids. And so that's part of the why. So what I've done is I've tried to kind of cover, what reflective practice is, but also how do you do it, where do you do it, who do you do it with, but also gone a little bit further down the rabbit hole. Why bother? Both consciously and unconsciously, we start to become a little bit aware of, why my boundaries are getting blurred here, and the light bulb can go off. Because I want to save them, or I'm repelled from them because they make me feel uncomfortable. And I'm more likely to stay consistent, because what helps is staying in our role, not over-promising, doing what we say, being reliable. And how do we maintain those boundaries when we're working with people who have not much experience of boundaries and have a lot of trauma? Is we need some space, and reflective practice space, to do that. So that's my take on it. There's other takes, people have different opinions about it, but that's my take on why bother with reflective practice and what it is. And I think it's worth exploring that in different ways.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ray. A great and very succinct, as you said, overview of reflective practice and the real importance of that in the workplace, and lots of comments with people agreeing with you, people wanting to book sessions of reflective practice with you, so you could be booked up for 2021. We've got a little bit of time for questions now, a couple of minutes. One question from Christine. Do you set ground rules for reflective practice at the start?
So yes, I think that's very helpful to do, but I don't like to labour them too much. So the key ones are confidentiality, and unless someone's sharing something very dangerous, that usual caveat, and agreeing them and trying not to. I think themes are very helpful. Why it often doesn't work for people is they kind of leave it too open, so it becomes a kind of moaning shop for why everybody hates senior management. So you need to. That's why themes are helpful, like engaging with people. Engagement is a good theme, or building motivation. It's about trying to get better at the work. Helps to emotionally contain the reflective practice space and build up that thing. So, a long answer to a short question. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, another comment. Risha says, thank you so much for that. I feel reflective practice and a safe space to talk together as a team is very important. And lots of other comments, people saying thank you, and the importance of that as a collaborative as a team. If anyone else has any, we've got another question coming now. What's your experience of managers or supervisees been in the same reflective practice space? We found this challenging with people from both sides, finding it hard to be open. Any comments on that?
Yes, so I think this is, I've changed my mind around this a few times over the years. So I think there's pros and cons is the nutshell. The difficulty with being open when your managers are there, and for managers to be open about the pressures on them, is it's harder because of people don't want to kind of be too vulnerable because they want a reference, etc., from the line manager. On the other hand, I wouldn't rule it out. It can be helpful if you can build up, because if you can do that, it can build up some trust and some understanding and some compassion and understanding about this people's point of view. I mean, sometimes I run it when I'm also in a management position because nobody else kind of wanted to run it. And I think it's better to do it than not to do it at all. But people would be reluctant to share some things in that group because I'm actually, in a management senior position within the service. So I'd say there's pros and cons. It probably helpful to have maybe easier or helpful to have people on in a similar role maybe in the reflective practice session. But if it's possible, I wouldn't rule out having some people who are in management roles, because in a healthy way, if you could reflect together, wouldn't that be better? But it's just harder.
Fabulous. Thanks, Ray. And we are approaching 12 o'clock, so I am going to wrap up the session now. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all the fabulous speakers that we've been joined by this morning, and to all attendees for such kind of great comments and discussions throughout. I hope you've found the session useful yourselves. Hopefully you're going to join us again at 2 p.m. for the second part of today's webinar. So it'll be 2 till 4 p.m. It's going to be via the same link, so you're able to leave now and we join at 2 o'clock. And I think that's all from me. If anyone's not joining us, I'm just going to put our national evaluation website link in the chat box. There you're able to sign up for our quarterly newsletter, where you'll hear about kind of latest publications, other upcoming events. There's the option you can access our Twitter via that as well. So yeah, please do get in touch if there's any other questions you'd like from us, and I hope to see you all at 2 o'clock. Have a nice lunch, everyone.